Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really intense topic, a sermon that lays out a prophesied final cosmic showdown. And at its heart, this isn't a war over land or power, it's a war over worship.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll see what the source says true worship looks like. Then, we'll get into the main conflict, Satan's desire for that same worship. After that, we'll explore the deceptive tactics, the ultimate consequences, and finally, we'll tackle a big theological question about Jesus before wrapping it all up.
Okay, first things first. To understand the conflict, the source material sets a baseline, a gold standard, if you will. And for that, it takes us to heaven.
And right here, this quote, this is the cornerstone of the whole argument. The sermon hammers this point home again and again. In heaven, there's no confusion. Every single being, elders, angels, you name it, directs all their worship to one place and one place only, to the one sitting on the throne. So that's the key takeaway. This singular focus, it's presented as the divine blueprint, the absolute, unchanging ideal for worship. And according to this sermon, everything else we're about to talk about is a corruption of this perfect standard. All right, so if that's the standard, where does the conflict come in? Well, if God is the only one getting worshipped, the tension comes from someone else who wants in on the action. The source introduces a rival who desperately wants that worship for himself.
And the sermon paints this as a cosmic rivalry, pure and simple. It's all about worship. You've got God, the creator, who is worthy of worship because, well, he's the creator. And then you have Satan, a created being whose entire motivation, according to the source, is this burning ambition to steal that worship for himself. This quote from Matthew really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? The sermon uses this to show that Satan's goal isn't just to cause chaos or to rebel. It's much more specific. It's about redirection. He doesn't want to just be left alone. He wants to be worshipped. He wants that devotion that's meant for God and God alone.
Okay, so that's the goal. But how could that possibly be achieved on a massive global scale? Well, the source material lays out a very deliberate strategy, a kind of chain of command that it says will be used in the end times.
It's basically presented as a four-step plan of deception. Think of it like a pyramid. At the very top, you have the dragon, who the source identifies as Satan. He gives his power to the next figure down, the beast, also called the Antichrist. The beast is the public figure who actually demands that people worship him. But how do you convince people to do that? That's where the false prophet comes in. He's the marketing guy, promoting the beast's worship and creating a physical image of the beast for people to focus on.
And the sermon gets super specific here, listing 5 things people will be tricked into worshiping. You've got the dragon, Satan himself, the beast he empowers, the image of that beast, and even, on a smaller scale, demons and evil spirits. It's interesting, the source also points out that holy angels actively refuse worship, which just reinforces that first rule we talked about. They always point back to the one on the throne.
And let's be clear, this isn't presented as some kind of optional thing. The sermon says the stakes are literally life and death. This whole system of false worship is backed up by an ultimatum: bow down to the image or you will be killed, period.
So that ultimatum forces everyone into a choice. And according to this teaching, that choice leads to one of 2 very, very different eternal outcomes.
Here's the choice the sermon presents, and it's a tough one. On one side, if you refuse to play along and worship the beast, you face a horrible consequence on earth. That could be execution, or in some cases, a period of torment from demonic forces. But on the other side, if you do accept the false worship, you avoid the earthly punishment, only to face what's described as God's wrath forever.
Now, that torment on earth, the source is very specific about it and mentions a period of 5 months. So while it's described as absolutely agonizing, the key here is that it's finite. It has an end date. But in stark contrast, look at the consequence for the other choice. For those who go along with the false worship, their torment is described with no end in sight. The sermon quotes this line: "The smoke of their torment rises forever and ever." It's a finite choice that the source says leads to an infinite consequence.
Okay, so this brings up a really important question, one that you might be thinking right now. The sermon definitely anticipates it. If the number one rule is worship only God on the throne, then what about Jesus?
Right? How can you worship Jesus if you're only supposed to worship God? Isn't that a contradiction? The sermon tackles this head on.
And the answer it provides is pretty direct. Citing passages like this one from Hebrews, the argument is that worshiping Jesus isn't something people just came up with. It's actually a direct command from God the Father. The Father himself commands the angels to worship the Son.
And to back this up, the sermon lays out these parallels from Scripture. Look at this. Both God on the throne and Jesus, called the Lamb, are described as living forever. They both share the throne, they both reign forever, and they are both worshipped in heaven. The argument being made is that they share the same divine nature that makes them worthy of worship.
So the conclusion the sermon comes to is this: worshiping Jesus isn't breaking that number one rule. In fact, it's fulfilling it. It's seen as an act of obedience to the Father, because He's the one who commanded it.
All right, so that brings us to the grand finale, the end of this cosmic conflict over worship and how it all gets resolved once and for all.
This source describes a final, decisive judgment. The bad guys, Satan, the beast, the false prophet, are thrown into the lake of fire, and the people who worship them, they face that same eternal punishment. And the ones who stayed true and worshiped God and the Lamb are in the end vindicated.
And so, at the end of the day, the source material boils everything down to this one single question. It suggests that if you strip away all the complex prophecy and imagery, what you're left with is a fundamental choice of allegiance. So, the question it leaves you with is, whom will you worship? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.